Hi, my name is Darlene, and I am here to inform you of the complications that could arise due to poor communication ethics between a social worker and their client. As a social worker, it's crucial to know what communication barriers you will experience and how to overcome them to make sure that your clients are able to thrive. Whether you're conducting your first client interview, facilitating a group session, or navigating a crisis situation, your ability to connect, understand, and respond appropriately can make the difference between breakthrough and breakdown. Social Work Institute wrote that. It just kind of gives you an example of what you could be working with as a social worker, and also the extremes of what could happen due to poor communication. So the importance of communication between a social worker and their client, the biggest one I have found was maintaining and gaining a rapport, which the foundation of is trust. If you don't have much trust, then you're not going to be able to build. If you're not able to understand each other, you're not going to be able to build. This enables you to better aid your client's success. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, communication is not being processed correctly from your client's standpoint. Emotional disturbances or turmoil is one of the first ones that I've noticed. Let's say somebody comes in and their life is chaotic, crazy. They're not able to understand or process correctly until they're talked down. They're not able to find a way out until, they might need a little bit more guiding in a different direction. Finding resources that benefit or lessen that burden is probably going to be one of those things that kind of helps calm them down a little bit, which also, adds to the trust and the rapport. Cultural language barriers is another barrier that you are going to come up against. Let's say somebody comes in off the streets and they're talking slang or street language, so to speak. You've got to be able to understand what they're saying without asking too many inquiring questions, because they're going to look at you and they're probably not going to think very highly of it. If you have to constantly go through and explain what you're saying to somebody, it gets annoying and it puts up that wall. So you're going to have to be able to understand at a moment's notice about what somebody's saying. Then for the ones that speak Spanish or a different language, there's usually interpreters that are going to be available at your disposal. Unless you're in an independent practice that you own, you're going to have to find your own otherwise. Then there's also strong feelings in a certain direction towards, like, let's say a rehab that's residential based. Some people are not going to be too inclined. They're not going to want to go into a residential facility because that loses their freedom. And you can't pester or anything because that could set them back. And if they turn away and don't come back, then, you probably could have done something to avoid it. And there's also the lack of motivation and limited resources. Depression it makes people not want to do anything. When you're depressed, and what's the point? Limited resources, i.e. cell phone. They just came off the streets. They don't have one. They probably sold it, or somebody stole it. They didn't have the money for it. So many different factors. You have to be able to point them in a direction that would help them build from nothing. Although it's easy to place the blame on the client, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's the social worker and their inappropriate manner. Social workers must navigate complex situations involving diverse individuals and communities, making the mastery of communication a cornerstone of professional competence. Kavita, Eduindex News. So whenever you have misguided care, that means too much care pointed in a certain direction that it shouldn't have been pointed in. Let's say too much care and compassion that oversteps that professional boundary. Now all of a sudden you've got a personal relationship, but you left the professionalism behind you. Then you've also got the nonverbal misguided care or the overstepping of their physical boundaries. That's going to make somebody uncomfortable. If it doesn't make you uncomfortable, somebody probably is down the line. I mean, being domineering or flaunting that you hold power over them, that's really not the case, because technically from the other side, they hold all the power because they decide whether you get a good review, whether you're successful at your job. So you gotta kind of find a middle ground with the whole I hold the power. Then there's the language or cultural differences or the lack of experience from the social worker. A lot of the time, if somebody walks into your office, they're gonna wanna know a little bit about you. And that goes with building the trust and the rapport. And if you don't see where they come from, if you don't know what it's like, a lot of the time it's gonna turn them away. Then if you don't have the proper training or education, you're not gonna know what direction to go in. So there were several different sources that I had used to gain this information, as well as my own experience going through the system. We've got Enhancing Communication for Social Work Success through Social Work Institute, Dr. Kavita, which I used to quote earlier, Communication Skills in Social Work, and In-Depth Exploration, Eduindex News. Sarah Lee wrote a pretty good paper on mastering communication in social work. And then Rodat, Simona, Verbal and Nonverbal Barriers in Social Work Communication, ResearchGate. So overcoming communication barriers starts with knowledge of an issue. And then the knowledge of the issue goes to pinpointing what the problem is, and knowing what to do afterwards follows. It's important to know what's going on with your client. It's also important to know what's going on from your side, because what happens with you usually exhibits on how you interact with others. Only good knowledge of these verbal and nonverbal barriers may help avoiding obstacles and impediments that can affect effective communication. That was part of what Rodat wrote on ResearchGate. Thank you for your time and for listening. I hope that you guys got something out of it.